George R.R. Martin just kind of confirmed that he's not finishing The Winds of Winter, which we kind of already knew. But finishing a story, having an end to a story is important, and we're going to discuss that. Guys, welcome to the Iron Seas. Before we talk about this, please take time to look at that subscribe button. Maybe click it, please. Help us out.
In George's own words, he says, unfortunately, I'm 13 years late. And every time I say that, I'm like, how could I be 13 years late? And, basically, he is coming to the conclusion that the fans may have been right all along. He says, some people say that, they'll never get Winds of Winter, and maybe they're right. And that's in his own words. So getting pretty disillusioned with the prospect of ever even finishing. But he does say he will never retire from writing because he's not a golfer.
So he'll continue what he's been doing and just working on other projects forever and ever.
And a lesson we can all kind of derive is the importance of finishing a story that you start, because it's not necessarily how many books you have in a series or how thick your book is and stuff. Is your story wrapped up? Because that's a whole separate art form. And it's something that many authors can, consider and kind of take away and learn from this George Martin fiasco going on here. Because it is nice to be affirmed and be proven right all along, but it is kind of sad also to see somebody get so down in the dumps about their own stuff that they have total control over.
I think important to mention, I believe everyone who starts a story goes in with the notion that they're expecting an ending. Like, everybody thinks that once they start something, that they're most likely going to get an ending. Of course, if it's a TV show that doesn't get another second season or something like that, but they all assumedly expect that the writer, whoever's creating the story, that they have a plan to end it at some point. It's not true, which kind of sucks. But having an ending is important, and it's like the reason people are expecting that is because it means something to them, right? Having that sensation of something being done is important. When we get people who are completionists, right? They'll play video games until they get 100% on the every single achievement or whatever. They go above and beyond on the level, like just not completing the story, but also the entirety of everything tasked in the game that it has.
A lot of people don't even start the main quest until they finish all the side quests, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing with George Martin. Except he's got so many side quests active, he doesn't even know what to do with it. And is starting to kind of look at how much time he has left, if you know what I mean. So
let's dive deeper into the best example of not finishing, which right now, of course, is A Song of Ice and Fire. A failure to focus on the main quest line, right? And that's what A Song of Ice and Fire is should be, is the main quest line. And he keeps drifting off to side quests, which is fine for a big, epic fantasy story too. Dive into some side quests every now and again, but don't have to put that necessarily in the big chunk of the primary Song of Ice and Fire. Novellas are a thing. Have A Song of Ice and Fire novellas, and then do your side story or whatever.
You make a really good point, because a lot of people talk about the whole 2 year gap crisis with George's books, where he basically, just for those who don't know, felt like he needed to do a time jump, but didn't want to do it because then he would have to have all this exposition, this passive exposition written in, and he just decided to write more books instead of continuing and expositing. But like you said, you could just do the time jump, do a very quick explanation, and allure people into a side project like a novella, like you said. Very simple thing. And then put a pin in that, because if that doesn't get finished, that's fine. We can always wonder what happened in the 2 years.
It almost feels like he wants a time gap or something like that. It's because he's trying to justify more side quests. He has more characters that he wants to introduce into the story. It's like, bro, the White Walkers, that's your main quest. Go to that and don't stop. If you have another thought, take it, write it down, and be like, okay, maybe that's something I can discover or drift on to later after I finish the main quest. I mean, creators and story writers all the time. It's not uncommon for our minds to wander and go into other stories, other projects. But, if you're not just a completely lazy asshole or just have a little bit of self-control. You're like, okay, let me narrow my thoughts into finishing the task at hand, which is Song of Ice and Fire. It's kind of pathetic you can't do that.
That's kind of what I did with my story here, but on a smaller scale. A Promise of Starlight, I came up with the world first. I finished the book first, and then once I had all this, it was primed and fresh in my head, and then I moved on to the Arche Chronicles, the same world, but it's like an anthology. I can do every spin-off I can think of, basically, if I want. And the important thing is this freaking book is done. It's done. It's there. And it was always there. It was there first. And then I explored the world. So it's like exactly what you're talking about. You can kind of release expansions after the fact. There's all kinds of ways to do this, and I know you get excited. People get excited to branch off in their stories. So, it's like you can't knock it every time either, because there's obviously so many successful examples, like George himself. He is a success. It's just he has this crossing the finish line issue.
I think everybody, though, who picked up the book picked it up with the thought that it was going to be finished. We're going to get into exactly why that finishing point is so important to people. But let's look at Brienne of Tarth for a second, right? We mentioned that. I quit A Song of Ice and Fire after book 4. Andy finished book 5. So to me, like, Brienne of Tarth was the biggest reason for me quitting book 4. I felt like she was the biggest portion of that story. And everything about her in book 4 could have just been a paragraph of just like, oh yeah, this is this person, like right up until she meets Lady Stoneheart, where they kill her, right? Because if you just read the end of book 4, like, she's dead, and then George, he decided to bring her back in book 5, I guess. But it was just so cheap, because it was like, well, you got to always ask yourself in story writing, what's the point of this if you're going to feed it to the reader? What is the point of following Brienne of Tarth in these camps? There's nothing. There's no point. Because it's just background noise that is filler information to her character, but it doesn't affect the overall story in any other way. Will she in future of the story? Maybe. I don't know. But if you ended at book 4, which he probably maybe intended to actually keep her dead, they kill her at the very end, and you're just like left hanging, where it's like, what was the point of that? Right? Like, you took me nowhere with this character, and we're now nowhere closer to the end. We just went on a side quest that meant nothing.
Kind of like how Jon Snow has been dead for 13 years. Jon Snow is still dead right now in the books. He could stay dead. That's the thing. That could be a liberty that the show just took, bringing him back. But yeah, it's kind of the same thing. Whereas, like, if you're just like a surface level fan that never watched the show, for example, which I know is rarity, but we're talking about like IPs in general, also, like just using George and A Song of Ice and Fire as kind of an example. Book readers only would just assume that Jon's dead. The way that whole thing goes down, oh dude, bro's dead. You know what I mean? So George could keep him dead, and it would be just like what you're talking about with Brienne of Tarth. The one thing I will say, though, that there could be pushback on with deeper readers is, like, there is a lot of like stuff going on with a lot of the pointless scenes. He puts the scenes together to kind of frame a portrait of like symbolic foreshadowing and stuff like that. But
what was that to do with the main quest?
Exactly. Because even the fact that you kill Jon Snow and we know that he gets resurrected because of the show and all that, what the act of killing him is a side quest, kind of, but it is like one of the main points, I will say. But like, yeah, it's just like this act derails it. Brienne is a great example, because here's the best example, actually. He begins every single book with a throwaway chapter. The prologue of every single book is a new character point of view every single time, and the character like dies at the end of the chapter, or you can assume that they go on to die, or you learn later on that they died, or something like that. It's always a throwaway character that literally is intended to die at the beginning of the prologue, for the most part, or like something terrible happens to them to the point where we don't even need to follow them ever again, right? So he's very aware of this kind of stuff, and though he paints these scenes with like intent a lot of the times, it is very much a side quest, and it's like you can create this greater tapestry. And a great example of this is with the Dunk and Egg books, the Hedge Knight books. He maintains a lot of that same symbolism that he uses in his main series in that. So why couldn't you do that with the spin-off novellas that we talked about earlier that technically don't matter if they don't get finished? You know, you can just keep a certain pacing with your narrative symbolism and foreshadowing that allows us to continue the main quest.
So let's use a garden as an example, because that's what he likes to do when he's talking about his story writing style. Let's say you plant an apple tree, right? Like the whole point is like his story is that tree, and we planted it so we can get apples from it. The apple is the finish, right? Now he's got a big whole thing. He's like, yeah, I put this apple tree in there. Let's let that grow. But in the meantime, I'm also going to work on this orange tree. And then you're like, okay, the oranges are cool. I like oranges too. But can we get back to the apple tree, because I'm trying to get the apples? He's like, yeah, but wait a minute.
Damn good.
What about growing some watermelons? And you're like, look, I get it. Watermelons are cool. But what about the apples, George? What about the apples? And to quote the great J.R.R. Tolkien, not to quote him because I don't know the quote, but to mention his lore, humans are given a very special gift of elves and others. They are gifted death. Why? Because an end to a life makes it all the more beautiful, all the more significant. Just like a story, an end to the story makes it all more significant. Otherwise, it's just a mess. It's just a tree that bears no fruit.
You're just an immortal hollow shell wandering the earth for all time is what it is if it's not finished.
Yeah.
It's so poetic. It's fun, and it's funny how it all comes back to Tolkien, and it's also funny how George's whole goal that he set off with was to like kind of subvert Tolkien. Yeah,
he's gonna shit on bringing back Gandalf, and then he's gonna bring back Brienne of Tarth. Fuck you.
And Jon Snow, allegedly, right?
Yeah, well, that's all. That's another topic for another day, because he needs a hero in his story. Ultimately, he keeps trying to subvert that. It ain't gonna happen, George.
That's a big debate.
Yeah, guys.
We could have a whole nother video on that. That's a big debate because where George started in the early 90s or whatever with this, and where he's at now, and where the world, how much the world has changed, he has to think differently now.
The importance of having an end to your story. Just think about the apple tree, guys. You're welcome.
And just remember that the real accolade, the real accolade that you get out of the whole writing thing, and where all the respect comes from, is from finishing it. It's from having a good start, maintaining and carrying the story, and then wrapping it up. This is why I think there's a lot of value in short stories. But yeah, thanks again for listening.
And hey, guys, if you made it this far, I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to us two retards. This is the Iron Seas channel, a great community of indie creators, story writers, awesome fucking retards. And you can join our team, subscribe. We put on an awesome show every Tuesday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And we even have a Discord. Show up to the show, you can get on it. And we're just having great autistic fun, and it's a blast.
But yeah, thanks again for listening, and until next time, cheers.